welcome to a very special event, a tribute to Mr. Rahul Bajaj by his three children, Rajiv, Sanjiv and Sunaina. Mr. Bajaj, as we all know, was a national icon, a public figure, the person behind Hamara Bajaj and the Chairman Emeritus of the Bajaj Group. Today, his children will share special memories of him, and it's a very poignant moment because we're here to discuss his book, which has been written by my mother, Dr.Gita Piramal. So I would like to introduce myself as a writer and a columnist, Aparna Piramal Raje, but really I'm here on my mother's behalf. So Rajiv, you are the managing director of Bajaj Auto, which is today not one of, but the world's largest and most valuable scooter company. Sunaina, you are a gallerist and director of the Kamalnayan Bajaj Gallery in Mumbai. And Sanjiv, you're the chairman and managing director of Bajaj Finserv. All three of you are keeping this legacy of Mr. Bajaj's life alive. So Rajiv, I'll start with you. You worked with him for 30 years, you overlapped. And you started off on the shop floor, in manufacturing, which is something you wanted. But that was also perhaps something he wanted, to make sure that you understood the business from the ground up. What was it like? Take us back to that time.
So I joined in 1990, December 1990. I don't think my father ever told me what to do. So if I chose to start work on the shop floor, that was my choice. I think the good thing was I had nothing in common with my father. He was trained as a lawyer. He had studied economics. He had been to business school. I did not have such an elegant education. I was a mechanical and manufacturing engineer. So I was a mechanic compared to him. He was a manager. So if he was in the office, I was on the shop floor. If he dealt with numbers, I dealt with components. So we had a very complementary relationship, So I remember that the first few years, the first 5 years specifically, that I really enjoyed applying everything I had learned to the shop floor at Bajaj Auto. There is nothing more gratifying for an engineer than to be able to translate what you have learned into something that actually tangibly happens with machines and components and motorcycles and things like that. And I would revel in going to his office maybe twice, thrice a week and say to him, come with me, I have something to show you. And to be honest, he was not a product person or production person, but he never said no. He always went along with me, even if in his safari suit, which was so trademark of him.
Yeah.
It was not very comfortable on the shop floor because it was hot and stuff like that. But he always came with me, and no matter how small the improvement was, he was always very appreciative of that. So that is how I started, and that's kind of, I would say, my first working memory of myself and my father.
So I want to fast forward a little bit, Sanjiv, to you at Bajaj Finserv. Of course, people associate Bajaj Auto very clearly with Mr. Bajaj. But for you, what was the role that he really played in getting this business, which has become so successful now?
Sometime around 2005, I was very much in Bajaj Auto running exports, where a large number of outside investors, well-wishers, the media kept telling him that, while you've got a large Bajaj Auto, you also have these budding companies in financial services, two insurance companies at that time, Bajaj Auto Finance, that existed then, and saying that over a period of time, as these get bigger, it will get more difficult for us to value these businesses because they're all in one pot. Investors also said that, some of us may want to just invest in the auto business, others in the financial services business. So why don't you break these up? And he used to say that, yeah, it's important, but not urgent. But in the background, a few of us started working in looking at what the details would be for the demerger process. And in FY 07-08, we underwent the demerger process and created the financial services independent structure. He was quite confident that with India growing in those years at 8-9%, financial services would provide an interesting new opportunity. It took a while for him to get convinced because he was always focused on sticking to what he did best. But over a period of time, he realized that financial services could provide a good opportunity. I had worked 10 years at Bajaj Auto. It was getting to that. Rajiv was firmly in the saddle over there. And I saw this opportunity to take these companies which had already existed and build those out. So in many ways, it was this entrepreneurial rush that came in. And because my father was not an expert in financial services, he decided to ask our uncle Nanu Pamnani, who had only recently retired from Citibank, if he would mentor me, help us build the business. And Nanu was more than happy to do so. So he found somebody who understood this world very well and who was willing to give time and be there behind us as we went out to build the business. And that's how by end of 2007 I had moved to financial services to start building it out.
Yeah, that sounds like a pretty strategic move at the beginning to find a resource and somebody who could, you would trust and who could build it out. I mean, have you found him doing these kind of calls all throughout in terms of building the businesses?
Across the financial services businesses, the role that my father played was one, whenever in the initial years we interviewed senior people to hire, he interviewed them as well. And his style was very different because he used to tell them upfront that, if you're sitting here across me, then everybody else has already asked you about your educational background, your experience, financial services, capabilities. My interest is to know how you will fit in over here. Will you fit into our culture? What are your values? How's your family taking this decision? You need to move to Pune. Financial services, most people were in Mumbai or Delhi. But he brought in this very unique perspective into the interviewing process and he used to provide us with those insights which we had not thought of because we were just looking at these individuals for their capability and experience in helping us build business. In the same way, we used to quarterly, he was chairman of these companies for many years, we used to quarterly take him through a very detailed review of how the business was doing. It typically went on for 3-4 hours or so with the top 20 people in the company presenting to him. And he had this ability to connect with each one of them. And he also had this very interesting way where he used to go and pick up issues which were not necessarily something that we would have looked at from a financial services perspective, but which were often very relevant and made us think through again if we were taking the right decisions. And this is what my team used to tell me after the first year or two of reviews. And I used to ask them, do you really want to attend this review? And people used to be very happy to be in those reviews because they said first, his personal connect with each one of us is special. And second, he sometimes provides insights or he asks us those questions which the rest of you all have not asked us. So they used to enjoy those reviews as well. So this was his way of adding value, of being meaningful, knowing very well that this was not his area of professional expertise.
Wow, so that's a really interesting learning for how you can actually have two consecutive successes, when something that is in your domain area, and even as you said, Rajiv, it was not perhaps making vehicles, was perhaps not something that he, grew up knowing about, and then getting into financial services. So ultimately, does it come down to really the values, the people, the culture, the emphasis on certain things like the frugality that I've seen when I've interacted with both of you. So is that what really differentiated him and made him so successful in both these two very different businesses? Either of you could.
No, I don't think so. I think, of course, the culture, values, and all of that is very important. But I think what really defined him, and I think Sanjiv referred to that, was his razor sharp focus. To do one thing at one time really well. It's that 10,000 hours of expertise that people talk about now. And I remember in those years, in the 90s, uh, ever so often we would hear him talk about, how his friends would advise him to diversify into one area or the other, because Bajaj Auto had been so successful, he had so much cash at his disposal, he had a great reputation, so why not do this and that and everything in between? And he was very clear. He said that, diversification and fragmentation are two sides of the same coin. A lot of people under the garb of de-risking are actually running a huge risk of becoming the jack of all trades and master of none. And that in a very, very competitive marketplace, you will pay the price for that eventually. And that's happened, right? A lot of so-called business groups that have stretched themselves across different sectors have gone nowhere really with that. So I think first and foremost, what was very important about him was his focus on excellence, on being world class, best in class, and putting every man, every minute and every rupee behind that effort. And the second, yes, values, etc. important. I would say the word that describes it best is integrity. Because so many times we heard him say, even at the end of an AGM speech, at the end of the day, I want to sleep well.
Sanjiv, you want to add to
Yeah, well, I will just add to that. These 3 points are very 3 clear points. Fourth was passion. Whatever he did, he only did if he was passionate about it. And he used to tell me that at times. He said, and I think he's told that to each one of us. He says, do whatever you're passionate about, but then try to be the best in what you do.
The book is full of these one-liners. For example, he says that I'm ready to go to jail for excess production, just as my parents went to jail for the freedom struggle. And there are lots of these. So did he have these kind of one-liners at home also? And
well, there are a lot of his quotes about, do what you want, but be the best at it, be passionate. That you can't build private heavens and public hell. I think that was so telling. And the world needs more of a hybrid between a yogi and an entrepreneur. There were so many of these quotes, and very often when I'm doing something or thinking of something, it comes back to me. I'm always thinking of what he would do in a particular situation, or what he would tell me to do, or what he would expect of me. And so he was so right in the way he thought and the way he went about things. So these are things.
yeah, I mean, it's interesting to talk about self-awareness and, having that understanding of yourself as to what you stand for and what you represent and what you embody, and really having the stamina to stick to that and not change that. I guess the reason I was asking that question also is really, could somebody who's much younger look to him and say, look, I want to be a Rahul Bajaj, right? So one of the things that my mother writes in the book is that he was a textbook leadership case, as you might see in a business school. But, often what you see in a business school in a textbook is not what you see in the practice. But he was actually, living this in the corporate world himself. Now, Sanjiv, somebody as you've been to Harvard, he was one of the first people to go to Harvard Business School. Do you see that lessons in leadership that you think can be replicated by not just, others from the outside who might want to see, but also people from your own family, the younger generation, who might want to get into the business?
What I found of him at work, actually it was true in everything he did. One, he was always thoroughly prepared. He never left work till his table was clear, and he never went to bed till he was fully ready for the next day. Even if it was 400 pages of documents for a board meeting the next day, if it was for a event he had to go and make a speech. So he was always thoroughly prepared. Second is, he could argue both points of view. And very often at work that used to exasperate us, because we had put forward a point of view, we knew this made sense. He would agree later on, but he had to put the other point of view also. Once he had evaluated what he thought were possible options and decided on one, he was very confident in how he went ahead and implemented that. And these are the typical things that we all learned in any good MBA school. But how he applied that was not in any textbook that you can learn. It came through his own experience. It came through, I think in his early years, he was born in 1938. He spent quite a few years in Varda. He saw what was happening with Gandhiji, the freedom struggle. At some level, that probably played a role. He used to tell us how his own father, whenever he used to be in Pune, after dinner, the two of them used to sit for hours and talk about all kinds of issues. And my grandfather was again a very straightforward, bold person. There's an anecdote in the book where in the late 60s, after Indira Gandhi starts nationalizing banks, a whole bunch of people from the Congress, including my grandfather, move away. And he tells my father, because he was chairman of most of our businesses, and he tells him that, we could face pushback from the government and your businesses could do that. And if you want to, I'm happy to step down as chairman and directors in all our companies. And my father said, no, you should do what you think is right, and if we have to suffer that, we will do so. So I think somewhere implicitly, explicitly, those engagements with my grandfather and with others around through that freedom movement, and later on his own experience helped build his own unique character.
And you think that unique character is something that you would hope to replicate in your life also, or do you think that's possible?
Each one of us are different people. I'm not outgoing as he is. I listen before I talk. He used to talk, but then he used to listen after that as well. But certain common elements, courage in your conviction, integrity, as Rajiv said, integrity across, not just in what you're doing at work and taking decisions, but just integrity of thought. Hard work, but hard work also in ways as I think is relevant. My father, till a very long period, he used to check what time we punched our cards at work, morning, evening. And every couple of months he used to take out those papers and tell us these were the days that you went late. So to him, in that manufacturing setup, it meant you had to be at work before the start of the shift and at the end of it. Today work is a lot more flexible. It has become virtual in the last few years. But yes, you work to what is required for the responsibilities that you take. So that honesty about your work and transparency in what you do, these are the elements which have stayed with me. Personalities, of course, we are each a different personality.
Sunaina, it's very clear in the book that your father was the patriarch and he held the family together. How did he do that when he had so many other demands on his time? And when I mean the family, I really mean the extended family as well.
Yeah. So, everyone, when they think of Papa, they think of his aggressive, outspoken, determined, driven persona. But I don't know if a lot of people realize, but he was very large-hearted and very kind-hearted. And for him, his greatest joy was people, his family, his friendships, his relationships. That meant a lot to him. And no matter how busy he was, he always made time for everybody. If anyone reached out to him, had an issue, wanted to talk, he would always give a time. No matter which country he was in, where he was, he always got back. And one thing I've seen of him is no matter how many emails he got a day, messages, emails, phone calls, he always returned them immediately or replied to all the emails. It would be some random emails from people you didn't even know, just the general random ones. But he would make it a point to reply to those also, which I don't think most of us do over here, but that's one thing I saw him do. So he was very much, for him, connecting with people, be it family, be it close friends, be it the larger, the country at large. I mean, people just randomly outside. It was very important to him. And he always made time for everybody. And we all felt that we could reach out to him anytime. He may not be able to talk that very minute, but he would definitely call back before end of the day or next day at the latest. He had a list and he was very clear, his PA knew, and he would always get back. So he also did a lot of holidays together. He would drive them. Diwali was always together with the entire family, extended family. He would plan many trips. Whenever he came to Bombay, where we always had dinners organized. So he made sure he spent time with us that way, wherever he could.
I mean, I know my mother has been on some of these trips also and seen these relationships. She also talks about in the book about how the relationships spilled across all aspects of business, government, society, and Rajiv, you referred to that also. Really, do you think this whole idea of business being a larger force not just something that is about the capitalism for a particular individual or a particular family, or looking at business as a larger force was something that he really represented. Would you agree with that?
When I joined in the 1990s, um, at that time we were still in a situation where demand was much ahead of supply, and actually that was my opportunity, because sometimes machines would not work, sometimes the labor was not cooperative, sometimes suppliers failed us, but at the end of the day we could not produce what we needed to. So along with a bunch of engineers, if I could apply myself to that problem and improve productivity, let's put it like that, that really helped the company. So at a particular point of time, there was a lot of resistance, especially from the workmen, to these improvements in productivity, because the thought process always becomes that if this is beneficial to the company, what is in it for me? And what's the answer to that question? So I remember there was one incident sometime in the 90s, I don't remember exactly when, and this happened at the Aurangabad plant. And my uncle doesn't like my saying this, but in my opinion, Akudi was inefficient. Aurangabad was completely mismanaged, and to get that whipped into shape was a big task. But we were a determined lot of young chaps, so we precipitated the issue. So there was resistance, there was violence, and then there was a strike, And usually at that time, and this was not just typical to Bajaj Auto, this was very typical of industry in general, usually one would kind of, in the name of finding a middle path, find a compromise, because one wanted the show to go on, right? The demand was there and you just needed to supply. But I remember we had a Shiv Sena union, a BKS union that time. And when the matter was escalated to my father's level, I said to him very clearly that, you are not going to yield. It doesn't matter how long this takes, but we are going to send the right signal, set the right precedent. And he backed us 100%. Now, how is the problem going to be solved? The irresistible force has met the immovable object. So this is taken to Matoshri, to Balasaheb Thackeray. So all of us go there, the so-called management side and the so-called union side. And now we are all sitting in his antechamber, and Bala Sahib is sitting there on his throne. Now what do you say? I mean, I asked myself then, what is it I would say to Bala Sahib Thackeray? And what my father did was so smart. He didn't say anything else. He just said, here are the keys to the company. Aap hi manage kar lo. So this Sun Tzu's wisdom, that the first step to victory is to put yourself out of the possibility of defeat. He did that for himself and for Balasaheb, because there was no question of any confrontation. He is saying, "Aap chabi le lo, aap hi karkhana chalao," which obviously he cannot. I mean, the other side cannot do. And for Balasaheb also, this was not offensive, because here is somebody who is submitting actually to him. And immediately it was agreed that some people who had caused trouble, they would be dismissed from the service of the company, because that would send the right signal, and find a kind of permanent solution to the problem. But then, what my father did was to agree to give a auto rickshaw free to each of those people, so that they could earn a livelihood from tomorrow, so that their family would not suffer, So it's about doing the right thing. But in the present context, in the present times we live in, whether you are in India or Ukraine, I would also say it's about doing the right thing with a human touch, with a human face, with grace. You don't hurt someone. You do the right thing, but it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has to be hurt at the end of the day. So that was important. So to answer your question, from a business point of view, it means that you must be competitive. You can't compromise on that, because otherwise you cannot survive. From a government point of view, it means that government must be supportive. If Balasaheb Thackeray had not supported us that day, maybe Bajaj Auto would have, gone along a very different course, at least for some time. And thirdly, it also means, I suppose, that society must be progressive. You must understand that circumstances are bigger than you, and when things change, you have to adapt to that change. You can't expect the world to adapt to yourself. So I think in this one problem, we can see so many facets of business, of government, of society.
So I'll just ask you rapid fire round because those are the kind of things that are very popular these days. 3 words to describe your father, and you get to have 3 each, not 1 each.
I would say honest and caring, outspoken.
That's 3.
No, honest and caring is 1.
Okay, fine.
Really?
She's the youngest. She's allowed.
Outspoken and passionate.
Amazing. Okay.
Courageous, compassionate, confident.
So to make it memorable, the F in father for me, first of all, stood for focus. This I will never forget. Secondly, for fearless. And third, for fun, because as you said, he used to be the fun of parties and events and dinners and everything. Focus, fearless and fun. That's 3 words.
But said in so many sentences. I didn't take so many sentences.
So I got it right.
Yeah, you got it.
All of you did well. Since I'm giving mark sheets over here, I'd give all of you A+.
We all get our coffee hampers.
Yeah, you get your coffee hamper.
Thank you.
So I just want to say thanks for making this happen.
Thank you, Aparna.
Thanks for making this happen.
Thank
It's a really special occasion and we'll remember a lot. And thank you to our audience for being here and for being with us on this really very, very special occasion. And we look forward to your support.